All right, welcome back to another episode of the Charting Life podcast, where we attempt to explore life's unexamined or overlooked aspects through meaningful conversations and always with a healthy dose of laughter. Today, I have an exciting episode with Rebekah Storey. We're going to get into things like forgiveness and calling and community and explore that and kind of see where all that leads us to. But a quick introduction. Rebekah is a national Christian speaker who helps women move from carrying the weight of anger to the freedom of forgiveness. She also coaches burned out Christian moms who are tired of running on caffeine and guilt to experience steady energy and grace based presence. Her storytelling is raw, practical, and hope filled, drawn from hard won lessons that forge real strength. Offstage, she and her husband are raising two teenage daughters, and she writes a weekly blog to encourage others in their walk with God. Anything else you'd like to add, Rebekah?
Certainly sounds like I'm a very busy person. Um, no, I think you did a good job covering it. I should add, we do have two dogs and two cats as well, so there's never a dull moment.
Yes, I can understand that. My house, it starts to feel like we're having a zoo at this point. We have one child, but he is starting to enter the teenage years. But we have a dog and a cat, and now we got chickens, and so we've got quite a bit going on. It's like, okay, any is there any more free moments we can include with animals in there?
Yeah.
So why don't you? I guess we'll kind of ask maybe a couple introductory questions, kind of learn a little bit more about you. Growing up, did you have anybody in your family or a mentor or a friend who was really helped you have form you into who you are today?
Honestly, I can say it was my parents. They were both strong Christians, and not only were we in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night,
Hmm.
but I also went to vacation Bible school every summer. And at night, my parents made it a priority that before bedtime, we would sit down and have family devotions. And so, what that looked like was basically they had kind of a kids version of the Bible, kind of a picture book with a shortened kid-friendly story, or not
Hmm.
kid-friendly, but easily understandable by kids.
Yeah.
Um, and so they would go through a Bible story with me. We'd talk about it, we'd pray. And so I learned from a very early age who Jesus was, why he was the most important thing in our family. And actually, I was only 5 years old when I told my parents that I wanted to follow Jesus. And I was so young that they were like, well, this is great. Does she understand what she's talking
Hmm.
about?
Right.
So they had me go and talk with the pastor at our church. And after he talked with me, he told them that I definitely understood what I was saying. And I got baptized at 5 years of age. So
All right.
my parents were very foundational in that.
Great. And did you pretty much stay on with your faith throughout your life, or did you kind of wander off of it? Because for a lot of people, there is the kind of that story where they, some stay on quite a bit, and then others, you know, take some other avenues or parts of their detours in their journey.
Yeah, I can say that I never wavered. Not because I'm any kind of an amazing person. That's just
Sure.
the journey that God took me on was
Hmm.
kind of a slow, steady walk. And I know there was a time in my life where I didn't actually appreciate the blessing that that was because I would hear other people's stories. And I'm like, they have such an amazing story. Why is mine so boring?
Hmm.
And then I matured a little more, grew a little more, and now I can honestly say it's really cool some of the stories that people have, but I really love the one that I have, and I'm
Hmm.
glad that I didn't have to go down some of those paths and that I was able to have a consistent walk with Jesus.
Yeah, fantastic. One of the things as a parent, especially when it comes to faith, is you hope your children have a boring testimony, that they
Yes.
don't have to learn the hard lessons. At least none of the ones that are very consequential. But that's great that
Right.
you've had that. So you travel a bit when you're as a speaker. Do you have any interesting travel stories, maybe where things either went like horribly wrong, or just a really interesting tidbit of something that you've learned on your travels?
Um, Thankfully, nothing horrible yet.
Good.
I've heard plenty of horror stories from other people recently with travels, but
Hmm.
one thing that I find funny is I've been able to. I'm originally from Florida, and I was able to go
Mhm.
back to Florida recently and speak there. And I was talking with some people, and I was reminded of how normal it is for people who live in Florida to have alligators and lizards and bugs and all kinds of things. Like
Mhm.
it's not a big deal. And then you move out of Florida, and for people who have never lived there, it's like, I don't know, that they can't
Mhm.
fathom how is that normal. And I think it makes me laugh a little when I am back in Florida, how normal people think it is. And then out here, people are like, I could never live there. How do you do that? That's scary.
Right. Yeah, I lived in Florida for a little while, and I worked at a hotel, and it was a lot of people did not understand the bugs there, and there was
Hmm.
this one particular one, it was a palmetto bug, and
Yes.
it looks like a cockroach, but it's not, or at least it resembles it enough that we've had there was a couple times that guests were concerned of the cleanliness of the hotel or the room. Was like, we saw this cockroach like on the balcony. He's like, it's that's just a normal thing for us. It's not a sanitary thing. It's just welcome to Florida.
Yes, yes. The first time that I left Florida and I was in college and I heard we were in line at lunch and someone said, "Oh, there's a roach, a
Mhm.
cockroach." And I'm looking all over for this
Mhm.
cockroach. And I'm like, "Where?" And they point, they're like, "It's right there." It was like this big. I'm like,
Mhm.
"That's not a roach."
Mhm.
Wait till you can put a saddle on it, then you've got a roach.
Right. Oh, that's funny. And it's just it's I find it interesting. Of course, in America, things are so large that it's you go from one region to the next, and it's a whole new world of different
Yeah.
things. But moving on a bit, again, we're going to talk about like forgiveness and some of your the place where you're at and what you're doing, part of your calling. What has there been a pivotal moment that pushed you in this direction, or was this always an interest of yours, or what shaped you into this?
No, this was not always an interest of mine. I didn't think I needed particular depth in this area. But basically, in my mid to late 20s, I was starting to become more and more of an independent adult. I'd been living on my own for a while. When I graduated from college, I moved across the country and was teaching and completely supporting myself. And I was starting to make some decisions. They weren't bad decisions, they were just my decisions. And my father didn't agree with some of the decisions I was making. And so he told me what he thought I should be doing. And definitely took that into consideration because I always respected his opinion. I honestly, even at the age of 26, 27, still thought he knew best. And so I looked into what he was suggesting and I started praying about these decisions. I asked for wise advice from friends at church. And I came to the conclusion that no, I need to be going in this direction. This is where God's leading me in these areas. And so I shared that with my dad, thinking that he would be proud of how much time I had taken to think about it, pray about it,
Hmm.
and that I had well thought out reasons for why I was going to do what I was going to do. But unfortunately, he was not okay with that. He was not okay unless I was doing what he thought I should do. And over a period of some months, things got more and more tense. Um, and I was feeling the pressure of he's getting more and more upset with me because I'm not bending and doing what he
Hmm.
wants. And so essentially the last conversation we had, it wasn't explicitly stated, but essentially he cut me out of his life and cut me off from my family. And that conversation happened about 2 months before I was getting married. And
Wow.
so my family was not allowed to come to the wedding. I had to ask my best friend's father if he would walk me down the aisle. And it was it was still a really good day,
Hmm.
but it was obviously in the back of my mind that my family was not at my wedding. And um, we went on our honeymoon. When we came back, I found out, or rather, my mom reached out and she started reconnecting with me. And I found out that my father had divorced her and had not
Hmm.
told me that. So there was a lot of foundational upheaval in my life at that time.
Right.
And I did not realize it then because I never said the words out loud, but I was so angry at my dad that I was choosing not to forgive him
Hmm.
for what he had done and how he had hurt me. And it was several years before I realized what I had done because our choices are not without consequences. And over those years, I was starting to harden into a bitter, resentful, cynical person. But it's slow, just like anything in life. You
Right.
don't lose your hair overnight, you don't gain weight overnight, you don't turn into a different person overnight. But God opened my eyes, and it was like I could see myself from outside. I started to see the way that I was thinking, how I was critical of people, and it didn't come out of my mouth, but the things I was thinking were not kind things, and the way that I was being. And I realized I needed to make a decision, and that God tells us to forgive. It's not a choice, it's a command.
Hmm.
And so I was really struggling with that. And I called my mom one day to say, I don't want to become a bitter person. I know I need to forgive him in order to not become bitter, but I can't forgive him. And it wasn't said that calmly.
Hmm.
And I said, I feel like I'm on a merry-go-round and I cannot get off this merry-go-round. And she thought about what I was saying for a moment. I said, I genuinely cannot forgive him. And I know that's what I have to do. Help. And she said, well, can you pray to want to forgive him? And that hit me kind of like a punch in the gut, like,
Yeah.
oh. And I thought about that for a minute and I said, yes, I can do that because I know that right now, if I prayed and asked God to help me forgive my father, that would be a lie because I don't want to. But I don't want to turn into this more than I want to hold on to my anger. And so I
Right.
started that journey at that time and I just said, God, help me want to forgive him. And so that was about a year of just praying that whenever my dad popped into my mind. And a year later, when he came to mind, I realized that uh, God had taken that burden, that anger, that hatred, that desire for revenge and resentment. He had taken it out of my heart and he had replaced it with a heart that desired to forgive my dad. I was shocked. I could not believe the
Hmm.
transformation that God had worked. So at that point, I started praying. And every time I remembered a way that I had been hurt, I would ask God to help me forgive that hurt, that offense. And a year later, I realized that I had forgiven everything that there was on, the imaginary list. And not only had I forgiven my dad for everything, but God had yet again transformed my heart to where I had genuine desire for reconciliation. Meaning, if my dad ever said that he wanted to reconcile, I would be able to say wholeheartedly, yes, let's talk
Hmm.
about how we reconcile this relationship. And I could not believe what that experience was like. And so God kind of let me enjoy that really high feeling for a while. And then I started feeling that nudging from the Holy Spirit of this isn't just for you, kind of like salvation, right? It is for you, but it's not just for you. And so I started saying, okay, God, who do you want me to talk to? Where do you want me to go? Tell me because this is amazing. And I want everyone to know about the freedom that comes from choosing to be obedient and forgive.
Wow. And thank you for sharing that story. There's so many different ways we can go through that, and I want to dive into that. But first off, what was it that you feel like you were supposed to do, or that God was calling you to do? Um, where and if you're comfortable with sharing, I'm curious what your father wanted you to do, but I'm also just again curious what with the direction that you felt like you were supposed to go in life.
Yeah. Well, there were three major decisions I was trying to figure out what to do. And probably one of the biggest ones at that point was I was teaching at a Christian school, and I was in Northern California. So for anyone who isn't putting the pieces together, teachers get paid peanuts.
Hmm.
Teachers at Christian schools get paid half of a peanut. And in Northern California, the cost of living is far more than anywhere else in the US, except
Hmm.
possibly New York City. And so I was really struggling to make ends meet, and I wasn't
Hmm.
doing anything fun. I mean, I'm in my 20s, I'm single, and the thought of going to a movie was like, do I have enough money to go to a movie? You
Hmm.
know, and
Right.
that's not a fun way to live, where you're paying your bills, but then you're just, at home because you can literally do nothing unless it's free. So I was trying to figure out, should I look for a different job? Should I pursue a teaching job at a public school? Should I pursue a different career altogether? And so, I mean, that's a legitimate
Hmm.
struggle right there, right? So I was praying about it, and the church I was attending, at my small group study one Wednesday night, I shared this request that I'm trying to figure out what to do. I'm really struggling, and I just don't know what God wants me to do as far as my job is concerned. And so we prayed that night, and then we went our ways for the week. And over the course of that week, I felt very clearly that God said to me, that He laid it on my heart. If the only reason that you're thinking of leaving this job is for money, that's not a good enough reason. And I thought, okay, I feel like I can make the decision, because I knew I loved the kids. I taught middle school kids. I loved the kids I taught. I enjoyed the people that I worked with. I loved the school that I was at. I was like, everything is great except the money. So with that answer, I was like, okay, I will sign the contract, because teachers work year to year contracts.
Hmm.
And so a week later, Wednesday, we're back in small group, and we've shared prayer requests, and we're getting ready to pray. And my friend Rosalind, right before we closed our, I said, wait, 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 I forgot. I need to tell Rebekah something. She said, I was praying for you this week, and I felt that God made it clear that He wanted me to tell you that if the only reason you're thinking about leaving this job is for money, that's not a good enough reason. It was verbatim what God had said to me. I still get goosebumps
Wow.
whenever I tell that story. And that is the one and only time in my life that I can think of where God was so loud and clear. And I know He did that because I was struggling so much to decide if what I decided was okay, even if it conflicted with my dad. I was struggling
Hmm.
so much with that, trying to really fully separate as an individual from just being his daughter to being his daughter, but an adult. And
Right.
so God said, okay, we're not going to leave any gray area for you. Here it is, black and white. And and that was huge for me, because I needed to have that 100% reassurance that I was doing what God wanted me to do, because what my dad wanted me to do was to look at potentially teaching at a public school, or going into another job where I
Mm.
would be paid a much better salary. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's good advice.
Right.
But I needed to do what God was calling me to do. So that was one of those decisions. And I'm thankful to this day that God made that clear, because I knew without a shadow of a doubt when I signed my name to the contract, yep,
Hmm.
this is where God wants me.
Yeah. And I would imagine God was still taking care of you through all of that, even though that was a, I'm sure that, financial struggle was there, but God was taking care of you through all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew if at least for the next year, this is where God
Hmm.
wants me, then God's going to provide what I need. So I don't need to worry what am I going to do because God made it
Hmm.
clear. And if this is where he wants me, he knows what I'm getting paid.
Right.
He's going to have to provide for what I need.
Absolutely. And just as a brief aside, you said you were doing teaching middle schoolers. I'm a
Yeah.
youth pastor and I do middle and high school students. Uh, do you have any tips for things that kind of worked for you as far as, how would I say that? Not necessarily keeping them in line, but kind of working with their rambunctiousness.
Oh, yeah. Um, well, I think one of the best things to do with that age group is to be willing to make a fool of yourself first.
Hmm.
Because, and what I mean by that is not trying to act like you have it all together. I wasn't trying to be the clown. I wasn't trying to entertain. But for example, if I tripped over my own feet in the front of the
Hmm.
classroom, get my balance back together. I would turn and kind of look at them, acknowledge the fact that, yes, that just happened, and take a bow and say, thank you. I will be here all week. Um, Rather than trying to act like, oh my goodness, that didn't happen. You guys didn't see anything. Um, and I think finding that line between um, joking with them when it's time to joke, and then when it's not, letting them know that, now we're going to be focused. I realize youth group
Hmm.
is a completely different atmosphere from a
Sure.
classroom, but there's still that give and take, right? Like here we're
Hmm.
joking around, we can be sarcastic, and then here we're going into something that's a little more serious, and I need your focus. And do not underestimate the power of being quiet and waiting for them to notice in the right
Yes.
moment. That is a powerful tool. Just being quiet, like
Hmm.
amazing how quickly, like, oh my gosh, why is she being quiet?
Right. Yeah, usually if I practice that portion, it takes maybe a few seconds, and then ultimately the ones who are either not paying attention or talking, with some corner of it, the other students are actually helping me get them
Yeah,
together. So
yeah,
that's but yeah, that was just kind of a fun little,
yeah.
aside thing there. But back to your story, you did mention that your wedding, that a lot of this division within your family kind of culminated right before your wedding. Um, how has your husband worked with you through all of this? Has he
Hmm.
been gracious or patient? I mean, hopefully, but how has he been able to work with you through all of this?
You know, there are not enough good things I can say about him. I look back at the first year of our marriage, and most people have a honeymoon first year, right? And
Hmm.
so they have time to kind of really build some strong bonds before the waves of life really start to hit.
Hmm.
That was not our story. I look back at that first year, and for me, it was awful because my foundation, what I had thought was my foundation, had been cracked and destroyed, right? My parents, who at that point in my life I believed were going to be married until they died. I mean, they'd been married
Hmm.
for a year longer than I was old. And, so there's that piece. If they could get divorced, what kind of guarantee do I have that my marriage isn't going to fall apart? And I think that was the first time it
Hmm.
truly sunk in. There is no guarantee. And that was terrifying. The fact that my dad wasn't talking to me, and I would think back through things and realize I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't
Hmm.
disrespectful. I wasn't rude. There's nothing that I need to apologize for. Why is this happening? I obviously I did go to counseling because those are some major things to deal with, but it also meant that I could not show up in our marriage the way I was showing up prior to getting married because a big shift in my
Hmm.
world had happened. And I look back at that and I think, man, he had every chance to run prior to getting married and even in the first year. And if he didn't run then, he's not going to run. And I cannot believe that God brought this man into my life at the exact right moment and the exact right personality. He's not perfect. Don't get me
Hmm.
wrong. He's not perfect,
Sure.
but he is incredibly patient and empathetic and understanding. And he knew during that time that the best thing he could do most of the time was just to be quiet and hold me and let me talk or cry or whatever. It wasn't to try and fix the problem
Hmm.
because he couldn't. And we came out of that period so much stronger than if that had never happened. Um, and it really gave him, I think, a deeper understanding. So both of our kids are girls. And I remember I've said to him on more than one occasion when they were little, don't ever let our girls feel or believe that your love is conditional.
Hmm.
Don't let them go through what I've gone through. And I've thanked him over and over and over for the kind of dad he is to them. They know without a doubt that he loves them no matter what. And I'm very thankful for his support because I have thought about it. If I hadn't had him in my life at that time, how would I have been able to go through that? What would my support system have been? And I don't know, but
Right.
God knew what I needed and God brought him to me. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And there's one of the things you mentioned is instead of trying to be the fixer, he was there in
mhm.
presence. And the stereotype is typically true, but especially for men, we're fixers. We want to fix the problem. I see something that's hurting my wife or upsetting her, and I'm like, I want to go take care of that in one way or another. And that's how I'm
Right.
showing love. But that's not necessarily what she needs. There are some times where I got to be the fixer, and other times I've just got to be there with her and with presence and comfort her and allow her to go through. Work through her emotions and everything that she's feeling in that moment. So that seems like he's a very wise man
Yeah.
to be able to do that. And you also mentioned how a lot of couples have that honeymoon phase. For my wife and I, as far as our love for each other, the honeymoon phase has lasted for many years. But as far as life challenges, we also were hit almost immediately
Mm,
with just it was like almost like once we got married, life in general, like all the challenges of life amplified. But our marriage, was kind of forged through all of that. Our relationship was, and of course, our determination to stay together and to work through any problems has been, incredible. But and that's kind of helped shape everything. But it is just interesting when I hear somebody else have an interest, a story where the details are different, but there's still that similarity of, after you got
yeah.
married, the challenges really started coming up.
Hmm.
Um, you mentioned something else as far as your journey of forgiveness, and I want to get into a definition of forgiveness in a minute, like how do you understand it? But before I forget, it seems like through what you were saying that forgiveness is an ongoing process. And
Hmm.
now, okay, I was going to ask if you would agree with that or want
Yeah.
to elaborate on that. So, is it like an ongoing process, or is it just ongoing until you get to that point, or is there like a maintaining aspect of that forgiveness?
Yeah, I think I think there's actually some different aspects to forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
I read something a couple weeks ago that it was really interesting the way they worded it. I hadn't thought of it that way before, and I was like, I really like that. I'm going to kind of tuck that away and use that. And the author, don't ask me what it was or where I was, I don't remember. I just remember the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
But the author said that forgiveness is just like food. You need to give it and receive it every day. And that
Mm-hmm.
really hit me because I hadn't ever thought of it as a daily need the way food is a daily need.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me as I sat there kind of contemplating it. Well, duh, I'm not perfect. I mess up every day. So I obviously need to receive it every day, but I
Mm-hmm.
also need to be willing to give it and not hold other people to a ridiculously high standard as well. And so when I think about, for example, my story with that particular event in my life with my father, I I was able to reach the end of forgiving that, but it
Hmm.
doesn't mean that forgiveness as a whole doesn't need to be ongoing, if that
Okay.
makes sense. I think it's kind of a both and. Um, so I needed to forgive that hurt, and God brought me to the end of being able to fully forgive it to where I can now say, there's honestly nothing I need to forgive him for. I am literally in a phase of waiting to see if God will bring about that reconciliation this side of heaven. And if
Hmm.
God doesn't, I'm okay with that. That was part of what I had to process, that I may not have that reconciliation this side of heaven. But as a daily part of my life, giving and receiving forgiveness, it is
Hmm.
ongoing. I mean, whether your whether your listeners are married or not, they interact with some of the same people every day, right? Whether it's
Hmm.
moms, dads, sisters, brothers, friends, and we all know very well the people you love the most are the ones who are going to hurt you the most, even if they're not trying to. And so, yes, forgiveness is ongoing. It's something you have to be thinking about. Um, for example, if there's something that happened, let's say last summer at the family reunion, or 6 months ago at the company picnic, well, probably not 6 months ago, but
Hmm.
because it was winter. Um, if that comes to mind, if that memory comes to mind, and you find yourself getting as angry as if it happened yesterday or last week, that's a good indication that there's something that you need to forgive. And
Hmm.
I say that having been in that spot myself. I don't say anything that's hard to hear that I haven't had to walk through myself.
Hmm.
Um, in fact, I've had stuff recently where memories have surfaced for whatever reason, and I thought, oh, I guess I need to work on forgiving that. Like it's not fun to realize that you've been holding on to something, right?
Right.
But that's a good indicator if your feelings are still as negatively strong as they were when the event happened or the incident happened. You've probably held on to something that you need to
Hmm.
forgive.
Yeah.
You don't necessarily need to go and tell the other person, I forgive you.
Right.
Use good judgment there. Pray about that and ask God for his wisdom. But if you're holding on to it, you need to release it.
Yeah. It's you're talking about the idea of holding on to or having a lot of the same feelings or intensity of the those feelings. Um, there's somebody in my life who hurt me when I was a very young child, and I needed to forgive them. And I've told the story on another podcast, but the short version of it is that I thought that if I just shoved those feelings aside and didn't feel bad
Mm,
about it, that was close enough to forgiveness or that was good enough. And maybe I genuinely wanted this person to come to God or to have healing. I didn't want anything bad to happen to this person, but that event, or those series of events are still something that shaped me in a negative way. And this is maybe a few years ago. I had a dream that I was, as a youth pastor up here, I'm in the youth group, trying to teach the kids, and then this person walks in the room, and
mm,
I let him have it. I was just yelling at him. I told him to get out, and it was um, it was a very real feeling dream. I woke up, I was telling my wife about it, and she just very humbly, simply said, "Maybe you haven't forgiven them yet." I was like,
mhm,
"Well, that's a good point." And so then I had to kind of go through that process of working through that. And when we're saying forgiveness, that might be something that a lot of us understand, like generally understand what it is. But if you're trying to really either define it or try to explain what forgiveness is, it gets a little tricky, a little difficult to explain that. How do you understand forgiveness? You don't have to give me like a Webster's definition or anything, but you just what does forgiveness like mean to you, or when you're saying forgiveness, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think something that I say when I in my speech when I talk to people, it's hard to hear, but it's the truth. And forgiveness is not an emotion.
Hmm.
And I kind of let that sink in because I think a lot of us think it's how you feel about someone, like, oh, okay, I'm good. You're forget. No, That's not what God says. Forgiveness, I said earlier, it's not a choice. I just want to correct that. It is a
Mm-hmm.
choice to obey or not to obey
Mm-hmm.
because God commands us to forgive. And what it means is to choose to release your right to revenge against the other person, which is really hard because when you've been deeply hurt or repeatedly hurt, that wound is deep. And that
Mm-hmm.
desire for revenge is natural.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about, if you allow your brain to go down that path, if I were to exact revenge on this person, what would that look like? It gets really dark and evil really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand with a new level why God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay. Because God can exact judgment without the negative effects of sin um, on his heart, the way it would for me, or you. If we were to exact revenge on our offenders, it would
Mm-hmm.
damage us as much as damaging the other person. And
Right.
it feels like when you've been wronged, it feels like this is my right to be angry, right? I have the right to be angry at you. I have the right to hold this against you. And we're actually deceiving ourselves that the other person is somehow being punished. And so forgiveness is saying, it's not saying that what they did doesn't matter. It's not saying that I will reconcile back with you 100% the way things were before. It's not saying I will trust you 100% the way things were before. That's not what forgiveness is. It
Mm-hmm.
is simply saying I choose not to hold on to my right to be angry at you. I am choosing to let that go, and I am choosing to trust God to handle what he needs to handle in that person's life. That's not my territory. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to get this boulder that's growing by the day out. And
Mm-hmm.
I do that by asking for God's help. Because, like I said earlier, I couldn't get it out of my own heart. I wanted it out, but I couldn't. I like to think of, did you read C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia?
Some of it. I watched the movies, but the I've never gotten to
Okay,
the books long term yet, though.
well, that works. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, when they go to
Mm-hmm.
that island and Edmund finds that gold cuff that he likes and
Mm-hmm.
puts it on, and then he turns into the dragon, right? And then he wants to, and for those who haven't read the book, sorry, let me not assume. So Aslan is a lion and he
Mm-hmm.
represents God.
Mm-hmm.
And Edmund is just a regular human boy. And he gets turned into a dragon because of the curse on the gold, the greed. And he wants to stop being a dragon. He wants to go back to being a boy. And so he scratches at himself. And in
Mm-hmm.
the book, C.S. Lewis describes it as um, he would dig deeper and deeper, but it was just, and it would feel like he was getting deep, but he would look and it was just scales. He wasn't making any noticeable difference. And then
Mm-hmm.
Aslan comes and tells, or actually it's Eustace, not Edmund. Sorry, let me get my characters right. He tells him, let me. And then in the book, the pain is described as something that is the most awful and most amazing feeling at the same time. And when Aslan the lion is done, the dragon is like a shell cracked open and he is free and back to being a boy again. And so I look at forgiveness that way. It's hard and it can be painful, but it's also amazing because
Mm-hmm.
when God works that transformation in your heart, you are genuinely free from the bonds that you had actually put on yourself. This is a really long
Right.
explanation to what I think forgiveness is.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. I was gonna, give one of my definitions of forgiveness that, and you almost said it verbatim at one point. And so, essentially not, if you have a right to, if someone hurts you, you have a right, they there's that offense, and you kind of have a right to hold something against them, whether that's a real or perceived right. There's further theological discussions and whatnot, but the point is you have a right to um to be upset and to be offended at what
Mm,
has happened. And to forgive, the Christian view is to forgive like Christ, is to lay down your right to be offended at them. And whether they pick it up or accept it is up to them. Um,
right.
but but your position, your part of it is to lay down that right. And so there's a few times you said almost verbatim with how I was going to say it. So I think that's great to see that kind of alignment. You mentioned the idea of obedience, and we have to obey God is to forgive. There's another aspect of obedience, especially when it comes to parents, is to honor your father and mother.
Hmm.
Did you struggle with that with your father, or was that how would you say in that situation, or even currently, how would you be able to honor your father in through all of this situation?
Yeah, I definitely struggled with that at the time. I think that was part of why it was so hard for me to st stick to my guns, so to speak, as far as the decisions I was making, because there was part of me that felt like if I'm not making the decision he wants, am I disrespecting him?
Hmm.
Am I being disobedient? And there was that real push-pull struggle because I thought, I'm not doing this to be obstinate. I'm not doing this because I'm trying to say I know what's best for me. I'm making these decisions because I've really prayed about them, and I believe with all my heart that this is the direction God is calling me in. And so, what I was trying to do at the time was to explain that as clearly and respectfully as possible, even though he wasn't accepting what I was saying.
Hmm.
And so, even though we would get in arguments, I was not lashing out. I was yelling because I was upset, but it was more of, I want you to hear what I'm saying and see that I have a good point, not you're stupid, you don't know what it wasn't like
Hmm.
that at all. And and that was part of a big part of that struggle for me was how do I make my own decisions when he doesn't agree with them without disrespecting him? And so that was really hard to navigate, but I truly believe that I did do a good job. And that
Hmm.
what I didn't understand at the time was that disagreement on his part did not mean that I was being disrespectful or dishonoring. Um, I see that a little more clearly now. And the other part is I do my very best when I share my story to not in any way badmouth him or malign him
Hmm.
as this, I don't paint him as this two-dimensional person because he's not. He never was and he
Right.
is not. He's a human being, he's flawed just like the rest of us. But I do believe that God has and will use my story, this part of my story, to help others. And so I am doing my best to be obedient to God, to share that and to share it in a way that isn't dishonoring
Hmm.
to my father, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
No, absolutely. There's through this podcast here, I've had some different conversations about this similar kind of a topic, and there's two different things that have come up, and it seems like with your story, it answers kind of both of them. But one way to honor your parents, especially when in situations, or even if they are um, continuing in something that's not good, just to put it lightly, they is the words that you speak, how you
Hmm.
communicate about them. And the other thing is one that I've understood for a bit is the short version I would say is like redeeming the name. And so
Hmm.
especially like in perhaps older cultures where the family name was very important, you
Hmm.
might have somebody who is maybe deteriorating what that name means, that reputation.
Yeah.
But by living in a certain way, you can start to redeem that name whether or not they ever want contact with you. And so I think that's another way to be able to honor your parents as well. And it sounds like a little bit of like what you're doing today brings at least some version of that to the table.
Yeah.
So yeah, you mentioned that you are or that you were a middle school teacher, and now you're traveling around, you're speaking all the time. So it has I'm assuming your career has shifted since then. Is
Yes.
that correct? Okay.
Yes.
And how did you realize that it was time for a change, or and then as far as like the idea of being called to do something, do you think this is just a continuation of your call, maybe in a different aspect or deeper, or is this something that's just switched entirely?
Oh, I absolutely believe it's a continuation.
Hmm.
When I left teaching, I left. I've always emphasized this with people that I left because I had hit a point where I was starting to get burned out because I wasn't being paid a livable wage, and I felt like I really wasn't honoring my family
Hmm.
by the fact that I was working so hard and not bringing home a reasonable amount of money to support them. And
Hmm.
also, our girls were younger at the time, and I really felt it was unfair to them that I was spending so much time, and I mean more than just 8 to 3, but
Sure.
so much more time, doing things for other people's kids and missing out on things with them. And so when I left teaching, the next job I went into, my friends were teasing me that you may have left teaching, but you're still doing teaching kind of things, and
Hmm.
you still have that teacher's heart. And so I've had a couple jobs since teaching, but they've both still been in that vein because that is definitely who God made me to be. And it's where I feel most at home is when I am in that capacity of teaching and helping other people, whether it's middle school kids or adults. And
Hmm.
so, as a result of what I went through, I started thinking and talking with God and saying, you know what? I love speaking. I tell people, my mom has almost more pictures of me as a kid with my mouth open than not because I was always talking. I
Hmm.
just was. And I don't shy away from that. I know that ironically, it's interesting. The number one fear of people is public speaking, not dying, public speaking. But I don't. I really enjoy doing that. But I was telling God, this is great and I love this and I want to keep doing this. But I really want to get down in the nitty gritty and help people a little more one on one because when you're speaking from a stage, um, you're speaking generally because you're trying to make sure everyone is able to receive something from what you're sharing.
Hmm.
And I said, Lord, I really want to work with people on this because I know that this being anger and forgiveness shows up differently in our attitudes, in our bodies, in our lives. So, for example, if you had met me at that time in my life, if you had asked me if I had an anger problem, I would have looked at you like, what? No.
Hmm.
I genuinely wouldn't have said that, right? There are people that, for example, they may struggle with not having control over how much alcohol they drink, but they're not at a point yet where they can identify that, yes, I do struggle with this. I may be an alcoholic, right? I didn't identify as someone that had an anger problem. But if you had said, do you feel burned out? Do you feel overwhelmed? Do you feel like you're constantly running on fumes? Do you feel like you struggle with guilt as a mom, whether you're being I would have said, ding, 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 ding. You
Hmm.
just hit all those bells. Because what I didn't realize was that those emotions, anger and forgiveness, kind of like what you said earlier, I put that on a back shelf in my mind because it was too overwhelming to think about at the time. What was I going to do about the relationship with my dad? And so, what was I going to do? I was going to put it on the back shelf and not think about it ever.
Hmm.
And when you do that, you may have decided not to deal with it, but that doesn't mean that it's not still working in your system because God made us, you know, physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, but we're all connected. We are all one being. And so what's going on mentally and emotionally is impacting us spiritually and physically as well. And so I started thinking about it and I was like, well, I'd really like to create a coaching business. I'd really like to work with women on this. But the more I thought about it, I was like, I can't create it based on forgiveness and anger because
Hmm.
they're not going to realize this is their problem because I didn't realize this was my problem. But I bet that there are a lot of moms that felt the way that I did, that struggle with feeling like, you know what, my day runs on guilt and caffeine, or guilt, caffeine, and
Hmm.
Jesus, or caffeine and Jesus, right? And it's kind of a joke, but it's not really. When you get down to it, they're feeling like everyone needs a piece of their time. They don't really have time to sit and be refreshed and restored themselves, and that 9 times out of 10, they end up snapping at their kids when they didn't need to just because they are stretched so thin. And I thought, yes, Lord, that is who I want to work with. I want to help them. And maybe at the root of it all, they don't have an anger problem. Maybe there isn't something they need to forgive. I'm not a counselor. I'm not going to try and drill that far down,
Right.
but I know that there are a lot of moms that struggle with this, and I just have a deep passion, having walked through that myself, to say, hey, I found some things that can help, and it's not adding more to your list. It's not putting more on your plate. Let's look at how we can help you actually take some things off your plate and start to get back to the person you know you're supposed to be, the person God made you to be, the person you want to be. So that's still teaching, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When I was doing some of the prep for this episode, one of the words that came to my mind was community.
Mhm.
And there is within everything that you were saying, whether it was some of your videos or different podcasts, that things you were guests on, again, the idea of community came about. And we'll kind of go a little bit in order. But as far as going back to forgiveness, is it something that you know can be done completely on your own, or do you think community, whether we're talking small like with your family or and maybe a
Mhm.
larger community like church or something like that, um, is what kind of role do you think that might play in forgiveness?
Oh, it's huge. You need to have community, whether it's small, like family, or small group at church, or the larger church body. You
Hmm.
have to have community because we, I, we all quickly and easily forget that there is constant spiritual warfare around us because none of our five senses can detect that, right?
Hmm.
And there's a reason that Paul tells us to put on the armor of God. And there's a reason that James tells us to go to prayer with the believers, right? To gather them together because the prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. Prayer is the way that we participate in that spiritual warfare, and prayer is not something we're supposed to be doing alone. And I actually use that image in my talks. I tell people, listen, when a soldier's going into battle, he's not going alone. He's going with his squad. And when
Hmm.
we go into spiritual battle, we shouldn't be going alone. We need to go with our squad. And I tell them that part of this forgiveness journey means finding people to walk with you, to be the prayer warriors in your squad. And that ideally it's a smaller squad because you want to be able to be vulnerable and share what you're currently really struggling with. And I
Hmm.
highly doubt you're going to feel like sharing that with the entire church congregation,
Right.
um, let alone who they might share that with, but also because you want to be able to share with your prayer squad the specific things that you need prayer for this week. And then you
Hmm.
need to also be praying for them. And it's so much easier to have that reciprocity in a small group. And so I always encourage them to find 2 to 3, no more, because then that becomes overwhelming trying to keep up with updating all those people with your prayer requests and staying on
Hmm.
top of praying for all those things. But you definitely need people walking that road with you, praying with you, encouraging you, checking in with you. Community is key in this
Yeah,
journey.
absolutely. And that goes much further than forgiveness as well. And I like what you
Yes.
mentioned, having just a couple of people, two or three. So you're having a group of maybe three or four people. And I know just from if you're trying to pray for somebody else, more than just Lord, please help them today. Because sometimes if someone
Hmm.
asks us to pray, if you've been a Christian long enough, someone's gonna ask you to pray for something, and you know you may not have a lot of time to stop what you're doing and pray, and
Yeah.
you'll offer just something that's very very generic. It doesn't mean it's not powerful, or it doesn't mean that it's not a real prayer. But sometimes there's a difference between
Yeah.
making a quick request versus like spending some real time in prayer, and it's difficult to do that for 10 people, so just a couple makes it much more manageable. And that leads into what you were talking about, the those who have so much going on, and whether they're running on caffeine or guilt or Jesus or some combination of all of that. And even if they're dealing with just deep things like anger or bitterness or
Hmm.
hurt, it seems like you were saying the sense of having community helps you walk through that. And so, you know, as a Christian, I would say that Christ, God does not leave us alone. God is with us through all of these trials that we go through, and God also gives us each other in order
Yes.
to go through that. And so I was going to ask if that seems like you agree with that, or
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at even during his time on earth, Jesus had a close group of friends, right? The disciples. And even
mhm,
among the disciples, there were a few that were kind of, I've heard the term used like the inner circle, not like they were VIP, they were just the ones that he
right,
was closer with.
mhm,
And he set that example for us because he was 100% human while he was still 100% God. And so he really, truly, intimately understands our needs, and we need each other. He didn't make us to be islands. He
mhm,
built us to be in community and in fellowship. And while emotions should not run our day, sometimes they take over, they get in the driver's seat, and it's our community, our closest friends who can check in with us and say, "Hey, how are you doing? You look like you need some encouragement today." Like they can pick up on that
mhm,
versus if we choose to live in a tower and not share anything with anyone, when we're down, we're going to be far deeper down than we would have been if we had allowed people to come into that inner circle. And then not only can they listen to us and give us that kind of decompression of getting things off our chest, but as Christian friends, they will point us back to God and get our focus back where it needs to be when it's been yanked away by the circumstances and troubles
mhm.
of life.
Absolutely. And I think maybe one of the last things I mentioned on this idea of community is, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who struggles with this, where I want to have grace for other people, but for myself, very little, if any. When I have my own struggles or failures or setbacks, I tend to take it without any grace that I allow myself to have. But for others, I will give it, wholeheartedly. And in a sense of, with community, you can be able to receive from others what you're not even willing to give to yourself. At least you have that opportunity in a much deeper level. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, this has been a fantastic conversation. And thank you so much for sharing your story and working through some of these things. Before we get into the last, somewhat more of a fun or interesting section, I'll give you the last word on any of the topics we had today. Do you have just final words or thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I heard someone say once, and another thing that struck me and just it sticks with me. When you are feeling anger or betrayal or any of the negative emotions that we experience in life, it's important to remind yourself that emotions are indicators, not decision makers. So just
Mm,
like in your car, when you have a light pop, like your tire pressure's low, that's an indicator that there's something you need to check. But it's not telling you this is what you need to do. You're on the highway going 75, put it in park and check it, right? It's just an
mhm,
indicator light. Emotions are indicator lights. So when you're feeling that emotion, that's an indicator that there's something that you need to investigate and figure out what you need to deal with. It should not be the thing that leads you to make a decision because
mhm,
emotions are not stable. God is. And so you take your emotions to Him and you ask Him for discernment and wisdom, what you need to do, why you're feeling this way. And He will not leave you without an answer because the Bible tells us He gives generously wisdom to all who ask.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. So again, thank you. And the idea of charting life, especially if this is your first time here, I like to ask all my first time guests a series of questions. And I love explorers and exploration and all of that. I just absolutely love it, which part of the name charting life is we're kind of charting unexplored areas. And so that's going to fuel a couple of these questions. Let's assume there is a new island that's been discovered somewhere, and you are tasked with going and charting this island, figuring everything out about it, making maps, that sort of thing. You could bring 5 people with you, real people, living or dead, with 2 little caveats. One is that somebody needs to help you be a survivalist person, and another needs to be a storyteller or someone who can be able to share the story of what's going on, and then 3 others.
Okay. Okay. The survivalist person, I would have to bring my friend Nicole because she is a nurse in the ER ICU,
Mhm.
so she knows all kinds of good stuff.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
not to mention that she loves going out on her kayak, so she's already got an adventurous spirit and she's tough. I'll have to tell her I volunteered her for this.
Hmm.
The second person you said, the storyteller person. Um, Honestly, I know it may sound kind of cheesy, but I'd have to bring my husband because he does a good job telling stories. Like I like to add all these details that sometimes people like get to the point. He does a really good job, so I bring him. I'd have to bring my brother for humor because little brothers, I mean, yes, he's a grown man, but he's still my little brother, you know,
You're right.
great for humor. I'd probably bring along, oh shoot, what was his name? Ah, I should have had this prepared. I should have had this written down.
It's all right.
Um, I think actually I'm just going to pivot. I'm going to go with George Washington because he had to be adventurous, right? Willing
Yeah.
to lead a war against our home country and then be
Hmm.
the very first president. That was a very adventurous spirit. Um, and then I think I'd also like to bring along, I've been learning a lot about her. I think I'd like to bring along Esther because I think
Hmm.
she was very attuned to listening to God's wisdom, and it would be really cool to hear her take on what should we do, how do we pray about this. And she's very brave, was very
Right.
brave.
Absolutely. Those are great answers. You could bring one crop with you to sustain life on the island. What is that?
Coconut, and here's why.
Okay.
You can eat a coconut, you can drink coconut water, and then you can use the fibers to weave and make stuff. So it's like
Absolutely.
all around great.
That might be the first time that I've heard coconut. So that's a really good option there. How do you decide which opportunities are worth pursuing? And maybe another way to think about
Mm.
this is if you have multiple open doors in front of you, how do you decide which one or ones would be the best ones to go through?
Well, this is not the pat church answer
Mhm.
of prayer, but it is my genuine answer. When I was in youth group, my youth pastor would jokingly say, sometimes he'd ask a question and we'd all sit there kind of like, I don't know what the answer is.
Mhm.
He would say, pretty much you're guaranteed to be right 9 times out of 10 if you say God, Jesus, or Bible.
Right.
So the blah, prayer is not a church answer in that sense. That is genuinely what I do. So, for example, when I was in college, I was thinking that I really wanted to go teach overseas in a school. And I was really hard-headed at the time because it took about 2 months before God finally got through to me that that was not what He had for my life.
Mhm.
I just was banging on every door trying to get something to work. And when I finally realized that was not what He had for me, I looked at the US and I said, well, holy cow, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I don't know what I'm supposed to
Mhm.
do. I started praying. I was like, Dear God, help me find the right school. Help me to know where you want me to go because I know I'm supposed to be a teacher. I'm ready to do that. But I was looking everywhere outside of the US. I don't have a clue what state to go to, if I should go back home or
Mhm.
somewhere else. And wouldn't you know, God's timing, very shortly after that, the man who was the superintendent of the school that I ended up at was at our college for recruiting purposes, and
Oh, wow.
that's the end of that story. So yeah, prayer. When you don't know what to do, you don't even have to say, God, I'm thinking between these two things. You could literally, genuinely say, God, what do I do?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
prayer. That's how I make all those decisions.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. When's the last time you laughed till it hurt?
It had to have been a while ago, because I cannot remember what it was. I remember it happening
Hmm.
because when I laugh super hard, like belly laugh, no
Hmm.
sound comes out of me. And
Okay.
I can hear everyone around me, and they're like, "Oh, it's coming! Just wait for it! It's coming!" Because tears will be running down my face. My eyes are clamped shut. Tears are running down, and I'm not making any noise, but there is air going in and out. I am
Okay,
breathing.
good.
And then and then all of a sudden I will get this deep breath and then this noise, this cacophony comes out of my mouth. And other people will start laughing because they can't get over the ridiculousness happening
Right.
around them. But it's usually a result of either my husband or one of our girls because I have very funny family members.
Nice. What about the last time you cried?
Honestly, it was probably last Sunday in church. I start thinking about when we sing, I'm not just singing because I like the sound of
Hmm.
the singing and the music, but I'm thinking about the words that I'm singing. And it doesn't matter that I've been following Jesus since I was 5. I think about what he has done in a slightly different way each time we're singing songs and the magnitude of his love for me, what he sacrificed for me, what he is still doing for me, hits me anew. And I tell my family every Sunday, I need to start putting tissues in my purse. And the next Sunday, I need to start putting tissues
Right.
in my purse. Guess what's still not in my purse?
Tissues.
Tissues.
Um, what does it mean to be good? And another way I might think about this, especially if it's your first time listening, um, at a funeral, you typically say, "Here lies so and so. They were a good man or a good woman." What does that mean to you, or what comes to your mind?
When I hear people say that, I ask that same question. What do you mean by that? Because I know that no matter how good that person was, they certainly weren't
Mhm.
perfect.
Sure.
For me, um, when I apply it to myself, I start thinking, how closely am I following Jesus? Meaning, I'm going to mess up. And there are going to be days where people are going to see a side of me that I will have wished they didn't see or didn't hear, and I could erase from their memories.
Hmm.
But overall, consistently, the choices in my life, how I live my life, the way I show up, what I want that to be is when I die, the collective of my life, the choices that I made on a daily basis every day, that those will be what they think of when they think of me as a good person, not that there was something good about me,
Hmm.
but that I really tried to live the way that Jesus wants me to live and to treat others the way he wants me to treat them and to talk to them and about them the way that he would want me to in a way that's pleasing and honoring to him. And I'm constantly doing that. In fact, I got to show you. I got this as a gift
Hmm.
years ago. Um, it says, Lord, keep your
Hmm.
arm around my shoulder and your hand over my mouth. Amen. Um,
Absolutely.
and that's kind of what I try to keep in my head as I go through my day is, am I living in a way that I'm helping to be a reflection of God's light in someone else's life? And so that good adjective, meaning how well did she reflect Jesus' love in the lives of others? That's what that means to me.
Good. Um, and then the not so fun question, but I think is equally important as the others. Going back to the island, let's say
Mhm.
something is going poorly. you're not going to make it out. You can send one last bit of advice to your family. And we're talking maybe if you're writing it down, one or two paragraphs at most, just some very short advice. What's your last advice you're leaving?
Um, Love one another. Um, do not um, do not get angry at God or blame God for what has happened. Um, I'll get to see you soon, and keep sharing um, the gospel with those around you. Good grief,
Fantastic.
you almost made me tear up again.
Well, fantastic. Thank you very much, Rebekah. It's been a great conversation, and I believe it's going to help a lot of people as they listen to it. Before we get off here, why don't you let people know where they can find you, whether it's website, social media, or wherever,
Yeah,
how they can connect with you?
yeah. So I have a website, my name, RebekahStorey.com, and I'm sure it'll be in the show notes, but in case
Mhm.
you're anxious to find it out right this second, it's Rebekah, just like in the Bible. And
Mhm.
then story is spelled Storey, so RebekahStorey.com. I also have a Facebook account and an Instagram account. And if you want to, you can sign up for email. I send out one post a week. I try not to overwhelm people's
Mhm.
inboxes. It's my Happy Tuesday email where I share whatever was on my mind to share that particular week. So I sent one out earlier today.
All right. And this is part of the obligation that I have to do, but definitely do the like, subscribe, share, all that sort of thing. But one request I do have on the share, as cool as it would be if someone just shared this episode to everyone they know, throughout some point in the conversation, somebody came to your mind, most likely. Whoever that is, share the episode with that person in particular. I think it'd be a lot more meaningful that way. So if you could do that, that would be incredible. I would enjoy it, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate the viewers that we have and everything. So with that, we'll go ahead and say we'll see you in the next one.